After passing by the gardener, the millionaire was paralyzed when he saw his pendant, the same one his son wore. Anthony has always lived under the shadow of an unknown past. Since he was little, he grew up in an orphanage, with no memories of his family. When he turned 18, he decided it was time to leave that place and find his own way in the world. The only clue to his origin was a moon-shaped pendant he always wore. With him, he carried the hope of a better future. After many difficulties, Anthony got a job as a gardener at the mansion of Mark Gonzalez, a wealthy and respected businessman. On his first day, he felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement as he walked through the estate's vast gardens. Upon arriving, he was greeted by Matthew Lopez, the mansion's butler. "I hope you know what you're doing," Matthew said in a cold, authoritative tone. "The gardens of this mansion demand dedication and perfection." Anthony, determined to prove himself, nodded. With confidence, he began to work, admiring the beauty of the flowers and shrubs that made up the lush gardens. Day after day, he dedicated himself to caring for each plant, always seeking perfection. However, even with all his effort, Matthew was always ready to criticize. "You pruned the plants wrong," complained Matthew, finding fault with his work. Anthony, on the other hand, remained calm and remained focused on his tasks, determined to do his best. One morning, while tending a rose garden, Anthony noticed the arrival of a luxurious car at the mansion's entrance. Mark Gonzalez had returned from one of his frequent business trips. It was the first time Anthony had seen his boss up close. Mark was an imposing man, but his gaze was gentle and observant. Anthony continued his work, oblivious to Mark's curiosity. His goal was simple: do his job to the best of his ability and, perhaps, one day discover more about his past. Working at Mark's mansion wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity to begin to unravel the mysteries of its origin. At the end of the day, Anthony was tired but pleased with the progress he had made in the garden. As he put away his tools, he reflected on this new phase of his life. Working at the mansion felt like a new beginning, a chance to build a future while at the same time trying to understand her past. With renewed hope and determination, Anthony headed home, unaware that a chance meeting with Mark and the pendant he wore could change everything. At Mark Gonzalez's mansion, Anthony was about to experience a transformation that would change their lives forever. He quickly adapted to the routine of being a gardener, but faced many difficulties, especially because of Matthew Lopez, the house's strict and authoritarian butler. From the beginning, Matthew treated Anthony with disdain. "You need to do a better job, Anthony. Those bushes are a shame," he often said, without offering any useful guidance. Despite constant criticism, Anthony remained calm and focused on his tasks, believing that his work would speak for itself. He hoped to earn Matthew's respect over time, but the tension between them only increased. One afternoon, a strong storm hit the region. Torrential rain and strong winds wreaked havoc on La Mansion's garden, scattering leaves and branches everywhere. Determined to keep the garden in order, Anthony worked tirelessly through the storm, trying to minimize the damage. Matthew, watching from one of the mansion's windows, didn't miss the opportunity to criticize. He went out into the garden, sheltered under a large umbrella, and began to berate Anthony in front of the other employees. "You can't even keep a garden in order during a storm. Unacceptable!" Matthew shouted, his voice overpowering the sound of the rain. "You should know that the garden of Mark Gonzalez's mansion demands perfection in everything." The other employees, who were also fighting the storm, stopped to watch the uncomfortable scene. Soaking and exhausted, Anthony tried to justify himself. "I'm doing the best I can, sir. Lopez. The storm was unexpected, but I'm working hard to clean everything up." However, Matthew was unwilling to listen and continued to humiliate Anthony, criticizing every little detail of his work. It was at that moment that Mark Gonzalez unexpectedly returned from a business trip. As he got out of the car, he noticed the commotion in the garden and walked over to see what was happening. "Matthew, what's going on here?" Mark firmly interrupted the butler's speech. "You tried to justify yourself, Mr. Gonzalez. I'm just making sure the garden is in perfect condition, but this gardener is failing in his duties," Matthew replied, trying to justify his stance. Mark looked at Anthony, who was clearly doing his best in the face of adversity. Then he turned to Matthew with a disapproving look. "I do not tolerate this type of behavior, Matthew. Everyone here works hard, especially in difficult conditions like this. Anthony is doing an excellent job and does not deserve to be treated this way." The other employees watched in silence, impressed by Mark's attitude. Matthew, visibly uncomfortable, mumbled an apology. Relieved and grateful, Anthony approached Mark. "Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I'm so grateful that you stood up for me." Mark smiled slightly and placed his hand on Anthony's shoulder. "Keep up the good work, Anthony. We are all under pressure, but mutual respect is essential." Since that day, Anthony has felt a new wave of motivation. He knew he still had challenges ahead, especially with Matthew, but he also knew he had Mark's support. This gave him the strength he needed to continue his work with dedication, determined to prove his worth and, perhaps, discover more about his past. After Mark's intervention, the atmosphere in the mansion began to change. Anthony, more valued and motivated, returned to work in the garden, but the scene of the conflict still lingered in his mind. For Mark, the pendant Anthony wore evoked a sense of familiarity that he couldn't ignore. The next morning, while Anthony was pruning the roses, Mark approached, determined to clarify his doubts. Watching the young gardener work diligently, he said, "Anthony, can I speak to you for a moment?" Anthony, wiping his hands on his pants, replied, "Of course, sir. Gonzalez. How can I help you?" Mark then pointed to the moon-shaped pendant that Anthony always wore. "This pendant is very beautiful and peculiar. Where did you get it?" Surprised by the question, Anthony replied, "I always have, sir. The caregivers at the orphanage where I grew up said they found me with him when I was a child, in a park. I never knew its origin." Upon hearing Anthony's story, Mark felt a strong emotional connection. He couldn't look away from the pendant, his memories of the past beginning to surface, bringing long-buried feelings to the surface. "At some point, you said they found you in a park?" Mark asked, trying to remain calm. "Yes," replied Anthony. "They found me alone, without any information about my parents. This pendant was the only thing I had." Mark was silent for a moment, processing the information. He recalled a tragic episode in his life when his son disappeared. The moon-shaped pendant had been a special gift he had given the boy. "Anthony, there's something about that pendant I need to investigate. Can I take a closer look?" Mark asked, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. Intrigued, Anthony removed the pendant and handed it to Mark. As he examined the object, a wave of emotions washed over Mark. He knew he needed to find out more about Anthony and his connection to the past. "Anthony," said Mark, handing back the pendant, "I'm going to ask you to be patient. There's something very important I need to check. I promise I'll have answers soon." Anthony nodded, still not fully understanding what was going on, but trusting Mark. He felt like something significant was about to be revealed, something that could change his life forever. With a heavy heart but full of determination, Mark walked away, aware that the journey to unravel the mystery of Anthony's past was just beginning. He was determined to discover the truth, no matter how painful or surprising it was. Upon arriving at his office in the mansion, disturbed by the recent revelations, Mark sat down in his armchair. Mark closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him, bringing images of a long-repressed past back to him with painful intensity. It was a sunny afternoon many years ago when he returned home with his son Anthony, who was just 3 years old. Anthony was sitting in the back seat, smiling and playing with his moon-shaped pendant, a special gift from Mark. This pendant symbolized the eternal bond between father and son, something Mark could never forget. As he drove through the quiet streets, a sudden sense of danger came over Mark. 3 hooded men appeared out of nowhere, blocking the road with a vehicle. In an instant, they surrounded the car, armed. Panic took over Mark, who tried to remain calm. "Please take whatever you want, but leave my son alone," Mark pleaded, his voice shaking. But the thieves showed no mercy. They dragged Mark out of the car and savagely beat him, leaving him unconscious on the sidewalk. Before he passed out, he heard the sound of the car engine moving away, taking his son away. Hours later, Mark woke up in the hospital, confused and in pain. When he realized that Anthony was not with him, despair consumed him. He tried to get up, but his injuries were serious, and doctors and nurses tried to calm him down. However, Mark knew something terrible had happened. The following days were a whirlwind of agony and desperate searching. Although weakened, he did everything he could to find his son. He contacted the police, hired private detectives and spread the word about Anthony's disappearance in every possible media outlet. His wife, Chloe, was devastated, and his fragile health only worsened under the stress. Finally, after days of anguish, the police found clues about the thieves. They had abandoned Anthony in a park, without documents or any clue as to his identity. Authorities took the child to an orphanage, but unaware that his true identity was recorded only as Anthony. Mark and Chloe searched every orphanage in the city, but never found their son. The pain of loss and guilt consumed Mark, who fell into work every day as a way of dealing with his grief, but never gave up hope of meeting Anthony again. Years later, upon seeing the pendant around the young gardener's neck, all those painful memories came back with a vengeance. Mark knew there was an undeniable link between that pendant and his lost son. With tears in his eyes, he made a silent promise to himself, "Anthony, I promise I will find out what really happened and I will bring you back." Determined to uncover the truth about Anthony, Mark decided to launch a thorough investigation into the young man's past. He began looking through old records, looking for any clue that might connect Anthony to his missing son. All documents that passed through his hands were carefully examined. Mark knew he couldn't do it alone, so he hired a trusted private detective who had worked for him in the past. Together, they revisited the kidnapping case, analyzing details that could have gone unnoticed. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Anthony continued to work diligently in the gardens, oblivious to the investigations Mark was carrying out. He dedicated himself to his tasks with determination, always seeking to improve and keep the gardens immaculate. Mark's words of support after the incident with Matthew renewed his motivation. Mark, in turn, began his search by revisiting the orphanage where Anthony had grown up. He spoke to former caregivers and staff who still remembered the boy. One of the caregivers, Donna Marta, an elderly woman with a generous heart, recognized Mark immediately. "I remember that day well, like it was yesterday," she said, her eyes shining with the memory. As Donna Marta served Mark tea, she began to remember the day they found Anthony alone in the park. "He was so small and scared," she said, and Mark felt a lump in his throat at that, but he maintained his composure. "Was there any record of it or any clues as to where it could have come from?" asked Mark, hopefully. The caregiver shook her head sadly. "Unfortunately not. He had no documents and no one came looking for him. We did what we could to care for him, but his past was always a mystery." Despite the initial disappointment, Mark did not give up. He and the detective began investigating missing persons records from the time, trying to find some connection between his son's kidnapping and Anthony's appearance in the park. Each clue was followed meticulously, but often resulted in dead ends. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Anthony began to notice that something was different. Mark seemed more thoughtful and distant, although he continued to treat him with the same kindness. Anthony wondered what could be going on, but decided not to ask, focusing on his responsibilities. One day, while going through old documents, the detective found a police report that mentioned an abandoned car near the park where Anthony was found. The report detailed that the car was registered to Mark Gonzalez and that there were signs of a struggle at the scene. Mark read the report with his heart racing. "That's my car. It's proof that we were close. Anthony must be my son," he thought, feeling a surge of hope and anxiety.
Before we continue, I need to tell you something amazing. Do you want to attract a lot of money into your life? Learn how to do it with the secret content that I will leave in the first pinned comment, and start transforming your financial life. Let's continue.
Determined to get definitive confirmation, Mark planned a DNA test. He knew this would be the only way to prove beyond a doubt that Anthony was his lost son. However, I wanted to approach the matter carefully so as not to scare the young man. As the investigation progressed, Mark began to observe Anthony with a new perspective. Every gesture, every expression, reminded him of his little son. The similarity was undeniable, but Mark knew he needed concrete proof before sharing his suspicions with Anthony. DNA evidence would be the key to revealing the truth. Determined, Mark began preparing the first steps to take the test, aware that the truth could change their lives forever. He was ready to face any consequence, with a heart full of hope. In the days that followed, Mark began spending more time with Anthony. He found excuses to go out into the garden, observe the young man's work and, occasionally, help with some tasks. Mark's presence in the garden has become a pleasant routine for both of us. Anthony, initially surprised, began to enjoy Mark's company, who always showed an interest in learning more about gardening. "You have a knack for this," Mark commented one day, as he admired a bed of newly planted flowers. "Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I have always liked taking care of plants. It's something that brings me peace," Anthony replied with a shy smile. As they spent more time together, a special connection began to form. Mark felt a growing affection for Anthony, and at the same time the young gardener began to see him not only as an employer but also as a mentor. They discussed life, work, and occasionally dreams and hopes for the future. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Chloe, Mark's wife, noticed the change in her husband's behavior. He was more present and involved in the routine of the house, especially the garden. Concerned about the reason for this sudden change, she decided to broach the subject with Mark. "Mark, I noticed you've been spending a lot of time with Anthony in the garden," Chloe commented one night over dinner. "What is happening?" Mark knew he could no longer keep his suspicions a secret. He looked into Chloe's eyes, feeling the urgency to share everything with her. "We need to talk, Chloe. There's something very important I need to tell you," he said, taking her hand. Intrigued and a little apprehensive, Chloe followed Mark into the office. Once there, he closed the door and began to tell all the discoveries and feelings that had tormented him since the day he saw the moon-shaped pendant on Anthony's neck. "Ever since I saw that pendant, I haven't stopped thinking that Anthony could be our son," said Mark, his voice full of emotion. "I started researching and found many coincidences that I cannot ignore." Chloe was silent, processing Mark's words. Tears began to roll down his face as he remembered his lost son, a hope that had almost been extinguished, but was now resurfacing with strength. "Do you really think he's our Anthony?" she asked, trembling. "I have no doubt, Chloe. But we need concrete evidence. I'm planning a DNA test to confirm." "Only then can we be sure," Mark replied, holding Chloe's hands tightly. She nodded, feeling a mixture of hope and fear. "Then let's go. We need to know the truth." From that moment on, Mark and Chloe bonded even more, nurturing the hope that Anthony was really the son they had lost. As they awaited the results of the DNA test, Mark continued to strengthen his bond with Anthony, trying to prepare him for the possibility of a revelation that would change their lives forever. Chloe, in turn, began to observe Anthony with special affection. Although she tried not to arouse suspicion, she felt excited watching him work in the garden, increasingly convinced that he was indeed the son they had lost years ago. The days passed slowly, and anticipation grew. The relationship between Mark and Anthony became increasingly stronger, creating a bond that transcended the simple relationship between employer and employee. Both felt that something deeply connected them, although they still did not fully understand the magnitude of that connection. Mark was determined to solve the mystery once and for all. Coincidences and suspicions were too strong to ignore. With the help of the private detective, he continued investigating every possible lead. During one of his searches, he found a retired former police officer, Mr. Ramirez, who had worked on the case of the child found in the park years ago. Mark made an appointment with Mr. Ramirez at a local cafe. He felt a mixture of anxiety and hope when the retired police officer, Mr. Ramirez, arrived. He got straight to the point. "Thank you for meeting with me. I need to know more about the boy who was found in the park years ago." "I think it could be my son," said Mark, trying to control his anxiety. Mr. Ramirez, an elderly man with still watchful eyes, looked at Mark curiously. "I remember this case well. It was one of the saddest I've ever seen. The boy was just scared. There were no clues to his identity except a moon-shaped pendant." Mark felt a chill when he heard the description. "This pendant, the boy is now a young man who works for me. I need to know if he is really my son." Mr. Ramirez nodded, understanding the urgency in Mark's voice. "I remember we did everything we could to find that boy's parents, but unfortunately we never did. Now that you mention it, his name was on the records as the owner of the abandoned car near the park. I always thought there was a connection." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, and Mark felt a surge of renewed hope. "But I need concrete proof, Mr. Ramirez. This is crucial for my wife and me. We need definitive confirmation. I am planning to take a DNA test. Do you think this might finally give us the answers?" The retired police officer agreed. "Yes, a DNA test would be irrefutable proof. If you need more information, I'm here to help in any way I can." Mark thanked Mr. Ramirez profusely and returned to the mansion with a sense of urgency. He knew the only way to confirm his suspicions was through DNA testing. When he arrived, he found Chloe waiting anxiously. "What did you discover?" Chloe asked, concern evident in her voice. Mark took his wife's hands and explained everything about the meeting with Mr. Ramirez. "Chloe, everything points to the fact that Anthony is indeed our son, but we need definitive proof. I will do a DNA test to confirm." Chloe nodded, excitement shining in her eyes. "Come on, Mark. We need to know the truth." Mark then went to the garden, where Anthony was, as always. He knew he should approach the young man with caution. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Mark asked, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. Anthony left what he was doing and walked over. "Of course, Mr. Gonzalez. What happened?" Mark took a deep breath before speaking. "Anthony, there is something very important I need to tell you. Ever since I saw your pendant, I felt like there could be a connection between us. I've spoken to a few people and gathered information that indicates you may be my missing son. I want to do a DNA test to be sure." Anthony was surprised, not knowing what to say. "Mr. Gonzalez, this is a big surprise. I always wanted to know about my past, but I never imagined something like this." Mark placed his hand on Anthony's shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "I understand this is a lot to process, but we need to know the truth. Let's take this test and find out once and for all." Anthony agreed, still stunned by the revelation. In the days that followed, the DNA test was carried out, and the wait for the results seemed endless. Mark, Chloe and Anthony experienced a roller coaster of emotions, each dealing with their expectations and fears. Finally, results day arrived. Mark held the envelope in his hands, feeling the weight of the truth that was about to be revealed. He looked at Chloe and Anthony, both equally anxious. With a tremor in his hands, he opened the envelope and read the result. It confirmed what their hearts already knew: Anthony was indeed Mark and Chloe's lost son, emotion filled the room. Chloe hugged Anthony, happy tears streaming down her face. Mark felt a mixture of relief and joy like never before. The truth was finally clear and the family was together again. The next morning, Anthony woke up feeling different. The revelation of his true identity still resonated in his mind, but he was determined to adapt to his new life as Mark and Chloe's son. Knowing that the transition would be full of challenges, but also opportunities, Mark's team provided all the necessary support. He decided it was time for Anthony to join the family business, not just as a member of the team, but in a position of trust. "Anthony, we want you to be an integral part of our company," Mark said over breakfast. "There is a lot to learn, but I believe you have the skill and intelligence to excel here." Anthony nodded, feeling honored and a little nervous. "Thank you, Dad. I will do my best. I look forward to learning." Over the next few weeks, Anthony began to learn about the corporate environment at the Gonzalez Company. He worked in a variety of areas, learning about finance, operations, and marketing. Each department offered a new perspective and a new skill set. Mark has always guided Anthony with patience and enthusiasm, and the company's employees, although initially surprised by his arrival, soon noticed his dedication and willingness to learn. However, not everyone was satisfied with the new situation. Matthew Lopez, the mansion's resentful butler, watched with growing discontent. He never got over the fact that Mark had defended Anthony in the garden and now saw him elevated to a prestigious position in the company. His envy and anger increased, and he began to plot against Anthony, trying to undermine his credibility and create conflict within the company. One day, while Anthony was reviewing important documents in the office, Matthew entered with an expression of false cordiality. "Anthony, you seem very busy," Matthew said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Do you need help? Maybe I can guide you on how things work around here." Anthony, not suspecting Matthew's intentions, accepted the offer. "Of course, Matthew. All help is welcome. I'm trying to understand these financial reports, but some points still confuse me," replied Anthony. Seizing the opportunity, Matthew began giving misleading advice, trying to cause mistakes that could harm Anthony. However, with his dedication and intelligence, Anthony was able to identify inconsistencies and correct errors before they caused any real damage. Noticing the growing tension, Mark called Anthony in for a chat. "Anthony, I noticed that Matthew tried to interfere with your work. I want you to know that I have complete confidence in you and your abilities." Anthony was grateful for the support and decided to confront Matthew directly. "Matthew, I know you tried to sabotage me. I'm here to work hard and learn, not cause problems. I hope we can find a way to work together." Matthew, surprised by Anthony's courage, had no choice but to retreat, at least for now. However, his inner rage only grew, and he continued to look for ways to take Anthony down. Despite Matthew's attempts, Anthony continued to excel in the company. He participated in important meetings, contributed innovative ideas and gained the trust of his colleagues. Mark and Chloe watched their son grow with pride, seeing in him a reflection of the qualities they had always admired. As the months passed, Anthony established himself as a respected leader, learning to navigate corporate challenges and strengthen his position within the company, all the while counting on his parents' unwavering support. At the end of each day, Anthony reflected on his path. He knew there was still a lot to discover and many challenges to face, but he was ready to face them, confident in his place in the Gonzalez family and in his future at the company. Anthony continued to adjust to his new life, finding strength and purpose in his new identity, while Mark and Chloe celebrated their son's presence in their lives, certain that the future was bright for everyone. Matthew Lopez, the mansion's butler, was increasingly resentful of Anthony's promotion in the family business. His envy and resentment led him to plan sabotage against the young man. With his main duties at the mansion and not at the company, Matthew began using his position and influence to create problems that would affect Anthony indirectly. He began spreading rumors among the mansion's employees, hoping that this distrust would extend to the company's employees. One morning, he invited some employees to the kitchen for a conversation. "We need to do something about Anthony," Matthew said conspiratorially. "He does not deserve the position he occupies. Let's show Mr. Gonzalez that he is not capable of leading." Influenced by Matthew's authority, the staff agreed to help him and began creating small problems in the mansion, from willful neglect in maintenance to the handling of Anthony's personal documents. The objective was to cause distractions and worries that would affect their performance in the company. On the other hand, Anthony adapted to his new position with determination and commitment. He dedicated himself to learning everything about the family business, attending important meetings and contributing innovative ideas. However, he began to notice that small things were going wrong both in the mansion and in the company. One afternoon, while reviewing an important report, Anthony noticed that some data was incorrect. He knew he had checked the information previously, so he decided to investigate further and discovered that the Clois documents had been altered. This discovery put Mark on alert. Always attentive to Anthony's well-being, Mark noticed the tension in his son. "Anthony, I noticed you're worried. What is happening?" Anthony explained the difficulties he was facing, mentioning the inconsistencies in the documents and the problems in the mansion. Mark, knowing Matthew's character well, began to suspect the butler. "I'll keep an eye on it, Anthony, believe me," said Mark, determined to protect his son and the company. Realizing that his actions had not yet had the desired impact, Matthew decided to intensify his efforts. He began manipulating the schedules of the mansion's employees, creating confusion and delays that directly affected Anthony's routine. Additionally, he began sending false information about Anthony to some key company employees, trying to sow doubts about his competence. Mark, now more vigilant, noticed that problems always arose when Matthew was around. He decided to investigate further and, during a surprise inspection of Matthew's rooms, found evidence of the manipulations, false documents and notes on Anthony's movements. With this evidence in hand, Mark called a meeting with Matthew. "Matthew, we need to talk," Mark said, remaining calm. "I found evidence that you sabotaged Anthony and caused problems at both the mansion and the company." The evidence was irrefutable, and Matthew tried to defend himself. "Mr. Gonzalez, I just wanted to protect the company. I didn't think Anthony was ready." Mark looked steadily at Matthew. "It's not your place to judge this. Your actions have demonstrated that you do not have the best interests of our family and our company in mind. You're fired." Matthew's departure brought immediate relief to the mansion and the company. Employees who had been influenced by him began to work with more harmony and less tension. Anthony, now free from the conspiracies, felt more confident and determined. With the continued support of Mark and Chloe, he solidified his position within the company, earning the respect and admiration of his colleagues. He courageously faced adversity, showing that he was more than prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. Mark and Chloe, proud of their son, knew he was on the right path to becoming a capable and honest leader, someone who could take the family business to new heights. Matthew's plot failed, and Anthony emerged stronger, ready for a bright future with his family. The morning sun illuminated the Gonzalez mansion with a golden light, symbolizing a new beginning for everyone. Anthony, now more confident, walked through the company's corridors with a firm posture. He had overcome many challenges and was ready to fully assume his responsibilities. Mark and Chloe, closely watching Anthony's progress, felt immense pride. Mark, in particular, was pleased to see that his son was not only talented, but also possessed a strong and principled character. He knew the company was in good hands. That afternoon, an important meeting was scheduled to discuss the next steps for the company. Anthony was prepared by reviewing all reports and strategic plans. He entered the meeting room with a confident presence, greeting executives and employees with a smile. "Good morning, everybody. Today we will discuss our growth strategies for the next quarter. I have some ideas that I think could take us to new heights, Anthony began, distributing the documents to each team member. As he presented his ideas, it became clear that he had an innovative vision for the company. Their plans were well-founded and showed a deep understanding of the market. Those who previously doubted his abilities now looked at him with respect and admiration. Mark, sitting next to Anthony, watched his son's every move with obvious pride, unable to contain a smile when he saw how he led the meeting with natural confidence. When the meeting ended, the applause was unanimous. Anthony proved to everyone that he was more than capable of leading the company. To celebrate this success, Mark and Chloe organized a small celebration at the mansion. Friends and family gathered in the main hall, where a lavish table was prepared. The atmosphere exuded joy and relief, as if the difficult times were finally behind us. Chloe, with a cheerful smile, raised a glass of champagne. Today we celebrate not only Anthony's success in the company, but also our family together. We are very proud of you, my son. Moved by his mother's words, Anthony stood up to speak. Thank you, Mom, and thank you, Dad. None of this would be possible without your support and trust. I still have a lot to learn, but with you by my side, I know we can achieve great things together. Mark placed his hand on Anthony's shoulder. We're in this together, son. You have shown that you are a true leader, and I know that our company and our family are in good hands with you. The celebration continued with laughter, lively conversations and moments of reflection on the journey they had taken. Anthony felt deep gratitude for finally finding his family and for having the opportunity to be part of something so special. As the night progressed, Anthony, Mark and Chloe left the party for a moment and went into the garden, where the stars were shining. They sat on a bench, enjoying the tranquility of the night and each other's company. Look at those stars, Chloe said, pointing to the sky. They were always there, even when we couldn't see them, as was our love and our hope to one day be together again. Mark smiled and took Chloe and Anthony's hands. Life gave us the chance to come together, and now, looking to the future, I know that we are strong and can face any challenge. Anthony nodded, feeling profound peace. Yes, Father. We are together and ready for whatever comes. With this feeling of unity and hope, the Gonzalez family looked to the future with optimism. They knew that despite the hardships of the past, they were stronger and more united than ever. The company would prosper under Anthony's leadership, and the mansion, which had once been a symbol of loss and sadness, now glowed with love and joy. This was the result of the journey, a new beginning. Anthony, Mark and Chloe were finally at peace and ready to build a bright future together, sustained by the love and strength of a truly reunited family. Did you like today's story? So leave your like, subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. By doing so you won't miss our next story. A big hug and see you next time.